The lights inside orbital station Kepler-7 flickered twice before returning to their normal glow, and Daniel Carter looked up from his work with a tired sigh. He had been fixing the same power coupling for nearly 3 hours now, and his back was starting to ache from bending over the access panel. He wiped his hands on his work uniform and stood up slowly, stretching his arms above his head as he looked out through the observation window at the endless darkness of space. Somewhere out there, a ship was approaching the station, and everyone had been talking about it for weeks. The Cytherians were coming. Daniel had heard stories about them ever since humanity first made contact with the galactic community. They were an ancient species, older than most civilizations in the known universe, and they had built their empire on fear and blood. Literally blood, because the Cytherians fed on the blood of other sentient beings. Most species in the galaxy treated them with terrified respect. When a Cytherian delegation arrived at your station or your planet, you gave them whatever they wanted and hoped they would leave quickly. Nobody wanted to become their next meal, but humans were new to this game, and Daniel wondered how his people would handle the situation. Commander Lydia Grant had called a meeting the day before to brief the crew on proper protocols. "Listen carefully," she had said, her sharp eyes moving across the assembled crew members. "The Cytherians expect fear from everyone they meet. They use intimidation as a negotiation tactic, and most species simply give in to avoid conflict." She had paused then, letting her words sink in before continuing. "We are not going to cower before them, but we are also not going to provoke them. Stay calm, stay professional, and do not show weakness. They respect strength, even if they do not admit it openly." Daniel remembered nodding along with the others, though he had wondered what strength really meant when facing creatures who could drain you dry in minutes. He supposed he would find out soon enough. The announcement came over the station speakers just as he finished packing up his tools. "Attention all personnel. The Cytherian diplomatic vessel has entered docking range. All non-essential crew should remain in designated areas until further notice." Daniel grabbed his toolkit and started walking toward the maintenance bay. But the corridors were crowded with crew members trying to get a glimpse of the arriving ship through the observation windows. He found himself pushed toward the main docking area, where a small group had gathered to watch the Cytherian ship was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. It was long and sleek, with a dark red hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There were no visible weapons, but something about the vessel made his skin crawl. It looked hungry, like a predator waiting to strike. "Beautiful, is it not?" The voice came from behind him, and Daniel turned to find Commander Grant standing with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "That is one word for it," Daniel replied. Keeping his voice neutral, Grant smiled slightly. "I see you understand. That ship was designed to intimidate before any Cytherian ever sets foot on board. Everything about them is meant to make you afraid. Does it work?" "On most species, absolutely," Grant said. "The question is whether it will work on us." She walked away before Daniel could respond, leaving him alone with his thoughts as the alien ship completed its docking procedures. An hour later, Daniel was back in the maintenance corridor when he heard the commotion. Voices were raised somewhere nearby, and he recognized the sound of fear in them. He set down his tools and moved quietly toward the noise. What he found made him stop in his tracks. 3 Cytherians stood in the middle of a junction point, surrounded by station crew members who were pressed against the walls, trying to make themselves as small as possible. The aliens were tall, nearly 7 feet in height, with pale gray skin and eyes that glowed a faint crimson. Their mouths were slightly open, revealing rows of sharp teeth that gleamed under the station lights, but it was their presence that truly unnerved Daniel. He could feel it pressing against him like a physical weight, an aura of predatory power that made every instinct scream at him to run. The largest of the 3 was clearly in charge. He wore elegant robes of deep purple, and his movements were slow and deliberate. Like a hunter who knew his prey had nowhere to go, this had to be one of the nobles, Daniel realized. The reports had mentioned that the delegation included several members of the Cytherian aristocracy. The noble was speaking to a young crew member, a woman named Patricia, who worked in the communications department. She was trembling so badly that Daniel could see it from across the corridor. "Your fear is appropriate," the noble said, his voice a low hiss that echoed off the walls. "You understand what we are. You understand that your life means nothing to us." Patricia nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. Daniel felt something stir inside him. He was afraid, certainly, but there was something else too. Anger, perhaps, or maybe just stubborn human pride. He stepped forward before he could think better of it. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Can I help you find something?" The noble turned slowly, his crimson eyes fixing on Daniel with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "And what are you?" the noble asked finally, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Daniel Carter," Daniel replied. "Maintenance engineer." The noble stepped closer, and Daniel forced himself to stand still. He could smell something strange now, a metallic scent that reminded him of copper and old wine. "You do not tremble," the noble observed. "Why?" Daniel shrugged. "I have work to do. Trembling would slow me down." The noble stared at him for another long moment, and then something unexpected happened. He smiled, revealing even more of those terrible teeth. "Interesting," he said softly. "Very interesting. I am Rennick of House Cithros. Remember that name, human, because you will be hearing it again." He turned and walked away, his companions following close behind. Daniel watched them go, his pulse finally beginning to slow behind him. Patricia collapsed against the wall, sobbing with relief. Daniel helped her up and walked her to the medical bay, where Tessa Moore took over. "What happened out there?" Tessa asked, her eyes wide. "I met a Cytherian noble," Daniel said simply. "His name is Rennick, and I think I just made things very complicated for myself. He had no idea how right he was." The next 2 days passed in a strange kind of tension that settled over the entire station like a heavy blanket. The Cytherian delegation moved through the corridors as if they owned the place, and in a way, Daniel supposed they did. Nobody dared to challenge them. Nobody dared to meet their eyes for too long. But Rennick was different from the others, Daniel noticed it first during a routine maintenance check near the diplomatic quarters. He was replacing a faulty sensor when he felt that familiar pressure, that sense of being watched by something dangerous. He turned slowly and found Rennick standing at the end of the corridor, his crimson eyes fixed on Daniel with an expression that was hard to read. "You again," Rennick said, walking closer with those slow, predatory steps. "The human who does not tremble." Daniel continued working on the sensor, though his hands wanted to shake. "I told you, trembling slows me down. I have been thinking about you," Rennick said, stopping just a few feet away. "Wondering what makes you different from the others. Most of your kind avoid me now, crossing to the other side of corridors when they see me approaching. But you just continue with your work as if I am nothing special." "You are very special," Daniel replied, still not looking up. "You are a member of one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Everyone knows that. And yet you show me no fear." Daniel finally looked up, meeting those glowing eyes. "What would be the point? If you wanted to kill me, you would have done it already. Standing here, being afraid, would not change anything." Rennick tilted his head, studying Daniel like a scientist examining an unusual specimen. "Your logic is sound, but logic alone does not explain courage. There is something else inside you, something I have not encountered before." He leaned closer, and Daniel caught that metallic scent again. "Stronger this time. You smell different from the others," Rennick whispered. "Richer, more tempting." I find myself wanting to taste you, to see if your blood is as unusual as your behavior." Daniel felt his heart pounding, but he kept his expression calm. "Is that a threat?" "Consider it a warning," Rennick said. "Stay away from me, human, or I may not be able to control my hunger." He turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone in the corridor with his racing thoughts that evening. Daniel found himself in the station cafeteria, sitting across from Tessa Moore while she picked at her food. She was the station medic, responsible for the health of everyone on board, and she looked exhausted. "You heard about what happened?" Daniel asked. "Everyone heard," Tessa replied. "The Cytherian noble who keeps following the maintenance guy around. People are worried about you, Daniel. I can handle myself. Can you?" Tessa leaned forward, lowering her voice. "These creatures have conquered entire civilizations just by showing up and demanding tribute. They feed on blood, Daniel. Actual blood from living beings. And you think you can just talk your way out of trouble?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I do not know what I think. I just know that being afraid has never helped anyone." The next day, things got worse. Daniel was working in a storage room near the lower levels when the door slid open and Rennick stepped inside. This time, there was no curiosity in his eyes. "Only hunger. I tried to stay away," Rennick said, his voice low and dangerous. "I told myself you were just another human, just another piece of prey that I could ignore. But I cannot stop thinking about you." He moved fast, faster than Daniel could react, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. Daniel gasped as the air was knocked from his lungs. "I am going to drain every drop of blood from your body," Rennick hissed, pressing a clawed finger against Daniel's throat. "Your kind does not understand what we are capable of. You walk around like you own the galaxy, but you are nothing. You are food." Daniel could feel the sharp point of that claw breaking his skin, and a thin trickle of blood ran down his neck. Rennick's eyes widened at the sight, his nostrils flaring as he breathed in the scent. And then Daniel did something that shocked them both. He smiled. It was not a nervous smile or a frightened grimace. It was calm, almost peaceful, as if Daniel had suddenly remembered something important. "Go ahead," Daniel said quietly. "But you should know something about human blood first." Rennick froze, his grip loosening slightly. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Daniel slowly raised his hand and touched Rennick's wrist. It was a gentle touch, almost tender, and it confused the Cytherian completely. Prey did not touch their predators like this. Prey begged and screamed and tried to escape. "What are you doing?" Rennick demanded, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Giving you a choice," Daniel said. "You can drain my blood right now, and you will find out what happens when a Cytherian feeds on a human. Or you can let me go, and I will explain why your elders have never allowed your kind to hunt us." Rennick stared at him for a long moment, his crimson eyes searching Daniel's face for any sign of a bluff. But there was nothing there except calm certainty. Slowly, reluctantly, Rennick released his grip and stepped back. "Explain," he said, but Daniel just straightened his uniform and walked toward the door. "Ask Consul Draven. I am sure he knows the truth, even if he has never told you." He left Rennick standing alone in the storage room, confused and unsettled in a way he had never experienced before. Later that night, Tessa found Daniel in the medical bay, treating the small cut on his neck. "What happened?" she asked, rushing over to examine the wound. "Rennick happened," Daniel said. "But I'm fine." "You are not fine," Tessa insisted. "He almost killed you, but he did not," Daniel replied. "And do you want to know why?" "Because I know something about human blood that most people do not know. I read the classified files, Tessa. I know what our blood does to them." Tessa went very still. "How did you access those files?" "I am a maintenance engineer," Daniel said with a slight smile. "I have access to every system on this station. including the ones that are supposed to be locked. He looked at her seriously. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Tessa led Daniel to her private office at the back of the medical bay and closed the door behind them. She activated the privacy screens that would prevent anyone from listening in, and then she turned to face him with a serious expression. "How much do you know?" she asked. "Enough to understand why the Cytherians have never tried to feed on humans," Daniel replied. "Our blood is essentially poison to them, is it not?" Tessa was quiet for a long moment before she nodded. "It is more complicated than that. But yes, you have the basic idea. Human blood contains a unique combination of compounds that affect the Cytherian nervous system in very specific ways." She sat down at her desk and pulled up a series of medical diagrams on her screen. Daniel leaned in to look, though most of the scientific details were beyond his understanding. "Our blood has high concentrations of iron-binding proteins," Tessa explained. "Most species have similar proteins, but ours interact differently with Cytherian physiology. When a Cytherian consumes human blood, those proteins bind to receptors in their brain and cause a cascade of effects." "What kind of effects?" "First, there is intense euphoria," Tessa said. "Like the most powerful drug you can imagine. Then comes paralysis, usually within minutes. The Cytherian loses control of their body and enters a state similar to a coma." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "How long does it last?" "Days, sometimes weeks. It depends on how much blood they consume. And if they feed on humans multiple times, the effects become permanent. We are talking about severe neurological damage, memory loss, complete personality changes." She looked at him with troubled eyes. "Human blood is essentially a weapon against the Cytherians, and we did not even create it on purpose. It is just how our biology works." Daniel sat back, processing this information. "And the Cytherian leadership knows about this?" "We believe so," Tessa said. "When humanity first made contact with the galactic community, there were incidents. Cytherian scouts who attacked human colonists and then collapsed without explanation. The Cytherian Empire covered up those incidents, but we managed to obtain medical records through back channels. Why did we not tell everyone?" Daniel asked. "If other species knew that humans were toxic to Cytherians, it would change the balance of power completely." Tessa sighed. "That is exactly why we kept it secret. Humanity is new to the galactic stage, and we did not want our first major impact to be starting a war. If the Cytherians knew that we understood their weakness, they might have attacked us before we could use that knowledge against them. So we chose diplomacy instead. We chose survival," Tessa corrected. "And so far it has worked. The Cytherians treat us with more caution than they show other species. Even if they pretend otherwise." Daniel thought about Vrenok, about the hunger in those crimson eyes, and the way his grip had loosened when Daniel mentioned the truth about human blood. "He did not know," Daniel said slowly. "Vrenok had no idea that feeding on me would be dangerous for him. The Cytherian nobles probably keep that information restricted," Tessa agreed. "They do not want their warriors to appear weak, so they hide any vulnerability. But now Vrenok is suspicious," Daniel said. "I told him to ask Consul Draven about the truth." Tessa's eyes widened. "You did what?" "I had to say something to make him back off. He was about to drain me right there in the storage room." Tessa stood up abruptly, pacing across her small office. "This is bad, Daniel. If Vrenok starts digging into classified medical data, he might piece together the whole story. And if he feels humiliated or deceived by his own leaders, there is no telling what he might do." "What can he do?" Daniel asked. "Attack us?" "He's just one noble who represents the Cytherian Empire," Tessa reminded him. "If something happens to him while he is on this station, his people will demand answers. And if he causes an incident that exposes their weakness, The Empire might decide to silence everyone who knows. Daniel felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He had acted on instinct, trying to survive a dangerous moment. But he might have created an even bigger problem. "I need to talk to Commander Grant," he said. They found the commander in her office, reviewing the latest reports from the diplomatic negotiations. She looked up when they entered, and her expression sharpened when she saw their faces. "What happened?" she asked. Tessa explained quickly, and Daniel filled in the details of his encounter with Rennick. When they finished, Grant was silent for a long moment. "You did the right thing," she said finally, surprising them both. "If Rennick had fed on you, we would be dealing with an incapacitated Cytherian noble and a potential diplomatic crisis. At least this way, we have some control over the situation. But what do we do now?" Daniel asked. Grant stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "We wait and watch. Rennick will either approach his own leadership for answers, or he will come back to you for more information. Either way, we need to be ready." She turned back to face them. "I am increasing security around the delegation, and I am assigning a protection detail to you, Daniel. If Rennick tries anything, we will be prepared. And if the Cytherians find out about their weakness," Tessa asked. "Then we deal with it," Grant replied. "Humanity has faced worse odds and survived. This is what we do." That night, Daniel lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. Somewhere on this station, Rennick was probably doing the same thing. Wondering about the secrets his own people had kept from him, they were both searching for answers. Daniel realized, just in very different ways. And somehow, their paths had crossed in a way that neither of them could have predicted. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. But rest did not come easily somewhere in the diplomatic quarters. Rennick sat alone in his chambers, his mind racing. The human's words echoed in his head, and he could not shake the feeling that everything he believed about his own power was built on lies. He needed to know the truth, and he would get it, one way or another. The morning came with an unexpected summons. Daniel was in the middle of breakfast when his communicator beeped with an urgent message from Commander Grant. She wanted him in the diplomatic conference room immediately. He arrived to find Grant waiting outside the door, her expression tense but controlled. "Something happened last night," she said quietly. Rennick confronted Consul Draven and demanded answers about humans. Things got heated. How heated? Heated enough that Draven had to physically restrain him. Grant replied, "The Cytherian delegation is in chaos right now. Half of them are furious at Rennick for his behavior, and the other half are demanding to know what secrets their leadership has been keeping." She opened the door and gestured for Daniel to enter. "Rennick asked to speak with you specifically. I do not like it, but refusing could make things worse." Daniel stepped into the conference room and immediately felt that familiar pressure as Rennick turned to look at him. But something was different this time. The predatory hunger was still there, but it was overshadowed by something else. Confusion. Maybe even pain. "Leave us," Rennick said to the guards standing nearby. "That is not going to happen," Grant replied firmly. "My people stay." Rennick looked like he wanted to argue, but then he simply nodded and turned his attention back to Daniel. "You knew," he said. "You knew what would happen if I fed on you, and you let me threaten you anyway." "Why?" Daniel considered his answer carefully. "Because I wanted you to make your own choice. If I had just told you the truth immediately, you would not have believed me. You needed to feel the doubt first." "I felt more than doubt," Rennick admitted, his voice low. "I felt fear, and I do not understand why. I am a predator, the descendant of thousands of generations of hunters. Fear is supposed to be something that others feel toward me, not something I experience myself." He stepped closer, though he kept his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. "I spoke with Draven last night. I demanded to know the truth about humans. What did he tell you? Everything, Rennick said, and there was bitterness in his voice. He told me about the incidents during first contact, about the scouts who attacked your colonists and then fell into comas that lasted for weeks. He told me about the research our scientists conducted on human blood samples, about the compounds that shut down our nervous systems. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My entire life, I have been told that the Sifarian Empire conquered the galaxy because we are the ultimate predators. We take what we want, we feed on whoever we choose, and no one can stop us. But that was a lie. It was not entirely a lie, Daniel said gently. Your people are still powerful. You still have the strength and the technology to dominate most species, but not humans. Rennick finished. Not the one species that appeared from nowhere and joined the galactic community as if they belonged here all along. He looked at Daniel with those crimson eyes, searching for something. Why did your people not use this against us? You could have announced the truth to the entire galaxy. You could have made us look weak, destroyed our reputation, maybe even encouraged our enemies to rise against us. Daniel thought about that question for a long moment before answering. Because that is not who we are, Rennick frowned. What do you mean? Humans have a long history of violence and conflict. Daniel explained. We have fought countless wars among ourselves, committed terrible acts in the name of power and survival. But we have also learned from those mistakes. We have learned that true strength is not about dominating others. He met Rennick's gaze directly. We could have used our biological advantage to destroy your empire, or at least to weaken it significantly. But what would that have accomplished? More suffering, more death, more cycles of revenge and retaliation. We wanted something different. What did you want? Peace, Daniel said simply. We wanted to show the galaxy that humans could be trusted, that we would not exploit every advantage just because we could. We wanted to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear. Rennick was quiet for a long time, processing these words. You are saying that you showed mercy. I am saying that we made a choice, Daniel replied, and it was not an easy one. There were many in our government who wanted to reveal the truth and use it as leverage. But in the end, we decided that the short-term gain was not worth the long-term cost. And what about now? Rennick asked, what happens now that I know the truth? Daniel looked at Commander Grant, who had been listening silently from across the room. She gave him a small nod. That depends on you, Daniel said. You can return to your empire and tell everyone what you have learned. You can expose our secret and force a confrontation. Or you can choose a different path. What path? You could be the one who changes things. Daniel said, you could go back and tell your leaders that humans are not prey to be hunted, but potential allies to be respected. You could help build something new between our peoples. Rennick stared at him, and Daniel could see the conflict playing out behind those glowing eyes. Everything Rennick had been taught told him that power came from domination, from making others fear you. But here was a human offering him a completely different vision. You asked me to betray everything I have ever known. Rennick said finally, I ask you to think for yourself, Daniel replied. I ask you to consider whether the old ways are really serving your people, or whether they are just trapping you in endless cycles of violence. Rennick turned away, walking to the window and looking out at the stars. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into fists. I need time, he said. I need to think about what you have told me. Take all the time you need. Daniel said, we are not going anywhere. He left the conference room with Commander Grant, and as soon as the door closed behind them, she let out a long breath. That went better than I expected, she admitted. You handled him well. I just told him the truth, Daniel said. Sometimes that is all you can do. Grant nodded slowly. Now we wait and see what he does with it. They did not have to wait long. 3 days passed in tense silence. The Cytherian delegation remained on the station, but their behavior had changed dramatically. Where before they had moved through the corridors like predators on the hunt, now they stayed mostly in their quarters, speaking in low voices among themselves. Even the other species on board noticed the difference. Daniel continued his maintenance work, though he found it hard to concentrate. Every time a door opened unexpectedly, he half expected to see Vrenek standing there with some new demand or revelation, but Vrenek did not come finally. On the fourth day, Commander Grant summoned the senior staff to the main conference room. When Daniel arrived, he saw that Consul Draven and Vrenek were already there, along with several other Cytherian nobles. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile. "Thank you all for coming," Grant began. "Consul Draven has requested this meeting to discuss the future of relations between humanity and the Cytherian Empire." Draven stood, his tall figure commanding attention despite the uncertainty in his posture. "I have spent many years representing my people in diplomatic negotiations. In all that time, I have never encountered a species quite like yours." He glanced at Vrenek before continuing. "When we first learned about humans, we dismissed you as primitive newcomers, barely worth our attention. Your ships were slow, your weapons were weak, and your population was tiny compared to the great civilizations of the galaxy." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "We did not understand that your greatest strength was not in your technology or your numbers. It was in your character." Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions as he listened. Pride, certainly, but also a kind of sadness for all the misunderstandings that had led to this moment. "You discovered something that could have destroyed us," Draven continued. "A biological weapon that you did not create, but that nature gave you anyway. With that knowledge, you could have humiliated the Cytherian Empire, made us appear weak before the entire galaxy, perhaps even provoked a war that would have cost countless lives." He looked directly at Grant. "Instead, you chose silence. You chose to protect our dignity, even when we gave you no reason to." "Why?" Grant stood to respond. "Because we believe that lasting peace cannot be built on humiliation or revenge. We wanted to earn your respect through our actions, not force it through threats." Vrenek spoke up for the first time. "And yet you were prepared to defend yourselves if necessary. Your engineer knew the truth and used it to survive when I threatened him. That is not purely peaceful behavior." "No," Grant agreed. "It is not. We are not pacifists and we do not pretend to be. But there is a difference between defending yourself and seeking to dominate others. We will protect our people when we must, but we will never use our advantages to subjugate or exploit." Draven nodded slowly. "This is what we have come to understand, and it has forced us to reconsider many things about our own approach to the galaxy." He reached into his robes and produced a small device, which he placed on the table. "This contains a proposal for a new treaty between our peoples. Not the standard agreement we offer to other species, which is really just a polite form of submission, but something genuinely different." Grant picked up the device and examined it. "What kind of treaty?" "A mutual defense pact," Draven said. "Equal terms, equal obligations. If humanity is threatened, the Cytherian Empire will respond. If we face enemies, we would hope for the same from you." The room was silent as everyone processed this extraordinary offer. In the entire history of the Cytherian Empire, they had never treated another species as true equals. They took what they wanted and left. Partnership was simply not in their vocabulary until now. Grant looked at Daniel, and he saw the question in her eyes. She was asking if he thought this was genuine. If Vrenek and Draven could be trusted. Daniel thought about everything that had happened, about the fear he had felt when Vrenek held him against that wall, about the confusion and pain he had seen in the noble's eyes when the truth was finally revealed. "I believe they are sincere," he said quietly. "I cannot promise they will never disappoint us, but I think they are genuinely trying to change. Rennek met his gaze and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Grant turned back to Draven. I cannot accept this proposal on behalf of all humanity. That decision belongs to our government. But I can promise to forward it with my strongest recommendation. That is all we ask. Draven replied. The meeting ended with handshakes and careful words. And as the Cytherian delegation prepared to leave, Rennek approached Daniel one final time. There is something I still do not understand, Rennek said. When I held you by the throat and threatened to drain your blood, you touched my wrist. You smiled. Why? Daniel thought back to that moment, remembering the fear that had pounded through his veins even as he forced himself to stay calm. I wanted you to feel my pulse, he said. Steady, calm, unafraid. I wanted you to know that I was not your prey, that I was not afraid of you. But more than that, I wanted you to feel that you did not have to be afraid of me either. Rennek was quiet for a moment. You were trying to tell me that we could meet as equals. Something like that. Daniel agreed. I did not understand at the time, Rennek admitted. I thought you were mocking me or trying to confuse me. I did not realize you were offering me a chance to be something different. He extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship. I owe you a debt, Daniel Carter. Not for sparing my life, because you did not have the power to take it, but for showing me a truth that my own people had hidden from me. Daniel shook his hand. Just do something good with it. That is all the repayment I need. Rennek smiled, and for the first time, it was not the smile of a predator. It was something warmer, more genuine. I will try, he said. I cannot promise I will always succeed, but I will try. The Cytherian ship departed an hour later, carrying its delegation back to their empire with a proposal that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Daniel watched from the observation deck as the red hull disappeared into the darkness of space. Tessa came to stand beside him. Do you think this will actually work? A real alliance between humans and Cytherians? Daniel shrugged. I have no idea. There are so many things that could go wrong. So many old grudges and misunderstandings that could ruin everything. But you recommended we trust them anyway, because sometimes you have to take a chance, Daniel said. Sometimes you have to believe that people can change, even when all the evidence says otherwise. He turned away from the window and started walking back toward his quarters. Besides, if I had not taken a chance, Rennek would have drained me dry in that storage room. So clearly, risks can pay off, Tessa laughed. That is a strange way to look at it. Maybe, Daniel agreed. But it is the human way. We have always been willing to gamble on hope, even when the odds are against us. That is what makes us who we are. Outside the station, the stars continued to shine as they always had, indifferent to the small dramas of the creatures living among them. But somewhere in that vast darkness, a ship was carrying a message that could reshape the galaxy. And it had all started with a smile and a touch on the wrist. The future was uncertain, as futures always are, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like something worth hoping for.